Up next, the Authentically Detroit Book Club convenes live at Next Chapter Books on the East Side to talk about our first selection, Black AF History, the Un-Whitewashed Story of America. Keep it locked. Authentically Detroit starts after these messages.
Hey, y'all, it's Orlando. We just want to let you know that the views and opinions expressed during this podcast episode are those of the co-hosts and guests and not their sponsoring institutions. Now, let's start the show.
Hello, Detroit and the world. Welcome to another live episode of Authentically Detroit, broadcasting live from Next Chapter Books on Detroit's East Side. We are content partner to bridgedetroit.com. I'm Orlando Bailey, and my co-host is Donna Davidson. And we want to thank you for listening in and supporting our efforts to build a platform of authentic voices for real people in the city of Detroit. We want you to like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on all platforms. Donna and I are so excited to be joined by our new book club members to discuss Michael Harriot's Black AF History, the Un-Whitewashed Story of America.
I think for me, one of the things that stood out immediately is this perspective of acknowledging us just in the world, right? Not just in America. And what kept coming up for me reading, especially in the early chapters, is something that our friend Yodit Mesfin Johnson always says, but it really was encapsulated in the beginning chapters of the book, is that our stories does not begin in pain.
Yeah, exactly. And doesn't end there either, right?
And it doesn't end in pain.
And even as he's talking about pain, there's that humanity infused in there. And so we can have pain. Mm-hmm. We can have injustice, but we're still people, right? Mm-hmm. And so the other thing I love so much about this book.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
But one of the things I loved is the fact that he refused to call people slaves. Mm-hmm. It is a pet peeve of mine. I don't call people slaves. Slavery was a condition imposed on people. People were enslaved, right?
That was not their identity.
And what he also doesn't talk about is plantations. He talks about forced labor camps. And I'm like, yes, I've been using the terminology forced labor camps for a few years because you couldn't leave. If you were forced back on, it was a labor camp. You were there to produce, something that was good for, people who were not you. And so I thought that was really interesting as well.
The other thing that I thought was interesting is that he really did set the record straight on who founded America or who stole America. And what was really, really interesting is I really appreciated him taking his time and paying homage to the indigenous peoples that were here first and talking about just their sophistication and their civilian society and how they were in community with each other, how they lived off the land and how they knew the lands, and really how they controlled some of those early folks who wanted to come and colonize in Jamestown. And they were like, oh, not here, not today. What we gonna do, we gonna starve you out because y'all came over here without no food. Y'all don't even know how to grow food. So we might give you free lunch and then we might take it away. It was just an amazing truth-telling moment that we often don't get in school. That was the other thing that was jarring to me is that the fact that at 34 years old, reading another history book on America and the founding of America and Black people's role in it, I was still learning so many things that I did not know.
Absolutely.
And while that's exhilarating, it's also really frustrating to me.
It is frustrating because when I was in high school, I hated history. I did not like history, and it never occurred to me how much I would love history. I'm a history buff now, but history was never told in a way that honored my people.
Yeah.
It was always told in a way that honored people who were nothing like my people. I couldn't see my history in the stories that were told. I think it's important that we tell history in a fuller way, and so I really appreciated this telling of history. The other thing is, he talks about some of the people who were conquistadors in America, and they were not all white people. There were black men who came here, and they were engaged in conquest too. They were murdering people too. It was not about race. So when you hear about they were here before Columbus, I don't know if there was a book, we were here before Columbus or something like that. The idea that people were here from the very beginning of when people, first, when Europe happened upon America. And it was not a discovery, right? They just happened upon here. Some of the interesting things about people coming here and being unable to, there were 4 times, I think, that they tried to bring people over to America from England. So the Portuguese and Spaniards conquered America with the support of the church, the Catholic Church. England had broken off from the Catholic Church. So the church was not funding their exploration. English people came here for money. It was always about capitalism for English people. It was about Queen Elizabeth, I believe, who was sending people here so that people could make money, which I thought was kind of interesting. But also the fact that you had many, many people initially who starved to death before this became profitable for anybody, before things were grown that actually produced some type of wealth for even the English. You had a lot of starvation. And what ended up happening is they planted tobacco.
Can I read it? I have it right here.
Okay, thank you.
I'll read it. Okay. And so it says, I think this is chapter 1 still. Once again, Jamestown was on the precipice of failure. The English investors were demanding their money, but King James didn't have it. Rolfe had land, but it was essentially worthless because he couldn't farm it. After a summer heat wave, colonists were preparing for a second starving time because investors were refusing to send more supplies until they got paid. In July 1619, the Virginia Company held its first legislative assembly. During the meetings, the assembly decided that if the company was going to survive, the colonists should probably grow enough food to feed themselves. They couldn't farm. This is funny. Instead of using 75% of the land to grow tobacco while depending on the native welfare system, America's first white legislative body limited tobacco production to 25% of the plantation's output and decided to give away plots of land to investors. While this plan seems reasonable on its head, the truth was these fools still didn't know how to farm and hadn't even attempted. So to pretend they'd suddenly understand and be able to provide for themselves was truly outlandish. There's a word for doing something over and over again and expecting different results. American.
Yeah. So the funny thing about that is, so they're here, they're trying to grow tobacco, they don't know how to grow food, and this is a failed experiment. Everybody's going to die. But meanwhile, the Portuguese are bringing people, Africans, and they have controlled the slave trade from Japan all the way to Brazil. And they're bringing kidnapped African people, and they ended up, pirates ended up stealing some of the cargo. And they ended up with, I believe, 20 enslaved people who knew how to grow things. Mm-hmm. And that is why the colony succeeded, because they were able to bring African people here who had the knowledge of how to grow things in this climate and had some skill sets. Now,
it was 24 people.
24 people kidnapped through piracy. And so when you think of this nation founded in ignorance, piracy, what does he say? The true origin story of America is intriguing enough, without embellishment. A tale that includes cannibalism, cross-country adventures, and the type of brazen incompetency that almost doomed this experiment in thievery. Mm-hmm. But of course, to save face and maximize profits, the story was revised until we ended up with a swashbuckling blockbuster that we now know, filled with idealistic, barrel-chested white saviors who immaculately conceived of a brand new kind of democracy with nothing but a few muskets and an abundance of caucasity. Sprinkle in a few pilgrims, a handful of savage Indians, and for diversity's sake, a few black characters who learned the value of hard work through 400 years of free labor, and you've got yourself a hit.
And that is what we've been subscribing to for years.
Yes.
Right? So it sort of just begs the question, like, who gets to tell history? Like, people who have the pen, right?
Yes.
And all too often, our pen, we had pens, our pen was ignored. But we'll get into that.
Well, and also we are miseducated, right?
Yeah.
And so many of us have internalized beliefs about inferiority. It's very interesting to me that people can tell you that your people are inferior, and because it's brainwashing, it's Americanization, and so you have to unlearn so much until you get to the point of understanding that all people were created equal, right? Mm-hmm. And black people have always been people, okay? And blackness is a cast that was put upon us. It's interesting to me, and this is going to go off, but I always say this, and I'm going to say it today. Race was created for the purpose of exploitation and extraction of value. That was the purpose of race. Race did not exist before then. You had people who came from different places. They were Moors, not because they were black. They were Moors because of where they came from, right? And so you had people that came from different places, and people noticed that people had different appearances, but race is a product of, or it was designed for that purpose. In 2024, why do we still categorize people by race? If it was a myth then, it's a myth now. If it's a social construct then, that social construct was designed to oppress us. I resent that. And so as far as I'm concerned, we all come from different places, and ethnicity is a better description of our difference than race. And that's not to say I'm not a proud black woman, because I am. That's my ethnicity, though. It's not my race, because race is something that people who had evil intent came up with. And you know, it's interesting how they can convince us to keep using those terms. But, you know, Michael Harriot kind of throws back a lot of the terminology at people and refuses to accept their terms. Again, whether he does not call people enslaved, doesn't call people slaves. He has a long passage. Do you remember what that is, his explanation?
I'll find it.
It's something.
I'll find it.
All right.
But he also, like, the colonizers and the conquestors, he calls them human traffickers, thieves, drug smugglers, petty. Like
right.
I love his use of all of these adjectives.
I do. So let's use the words that we use to describe people in the United States who we consider to be outside of us, but use it against those people who created the real crime. So that's in Chapter 3, The World Recentered. He talks about creating a legally binding, race-based, intergenerational, perpetually oppressed class of human beings. Okay? And he uses other ways to describe it. Virginia revealed that all the nonsense in the colony's first charter about God, liberty, and the true religion was a farce. Slavery was an American idea, not a product of the time. He talks about...
But in that, he also... described the brutality of American chattel slavery.
Absolutely.
And how that differed from anywhere else in the world, including Africa, because he wanted to combat the notion that some people would say, there was slavery in Africa, black people were enslaving other black people. And he really laid bare the delineation and the distinction of American chattel slavery.
It's perpetual. What he's saying is that in other places it was not constitutional, it was not perpetual, it was not intergenerational. You could be enslaved, but that did not mean that your children would also be enslaved, and there was no way out of it, right? And so there's even people who say, well, Irish people were enslaved too in America. They were indentured servants, and that was something that was found across America, but this idea that you were born into slavery, that a man could rape a woman, impregnate her, and her children would be forced to live in these labor camps, and there's no way out, right? So he talks about in that chapter also rice growing, and the fact that one of the things that African people brought was rice, the story of, the ability to plant rice. He says, rice growing is a difficult venture. Planting, growing, and harvesting the staple requires the engineering of levees, dams, and dikes. It's not just about planting. You have to know how to manage water to create that. And aside from the west coast of Africa, the only regions in the world that produce rice on a large scale were in Asia, a few in Italy. In a humid climate like Carolina, it is a backbreaking prospect that fosters disease, dehydration, and exhaustion. But even in these conditions, the Draytons, and these were people who owned, who enslaved people, kidnappers. The Drayton stolen human class were able to persevere, saving the family from starvation and the entire Carolina economic system from collapse with the introduction of America's first edible cash crop.
Talk about it.
Okay, and that was brought by African people to the Americas.
All right, let's put a bookmark right here, and we're gonna take a quick break. More Authentically Detroit after this.
Founded in 2021, the Stoudemire is a membership-based community recreation and wellness center centrally located on the east side of Detroit. Membership in the Stoudemire is available on a sliding scale for up to $20 per year or 20 hours of volunteer time. The Stoudemire offers art, dance, and fitness classes, community meetings and events, resource fairs, pop-up events, the neighborhood tech hub, and more. Members who are residents of the east side have access to exclusive services in the Wellness Network. Join today and live well, play well, be well. Visit ecndetroit.org.
Bridge Detroit is your news and engagement platform that is telling the stories of Detroiters rooted by community priorities. Started in 2020 by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Stephen Henderson, the newsroom has already established its footing as the go-to source for hyper-local perspectives that ask the hard questions, brings accountability, and searches out real solutions. It's free to become a member of this award-winning news organization. Visit bridgedetroit.com today to sign up to receive the news delivered right to your inbox. Bridge Detroit, by Detroiters, for Detroiters.
So one of the things I also want to talk about is the Gullah Geechee culture and the existence, and I did not know about this. Raise your hand if you knew about this, the existence of all of that there were many people all across the South who had escaped slavery, black people, and were living free even during the time of slavery. Okay? He talks about this one man, King. King was one of an estimated 100,000 Africans who temporarily or permanently escaped enslavement during the Revolutionary War, as many as escaped on the Underground Railroad during its entire history of existence. 25,000 escapees from South Carolina alone. This mass self-emancipation worked specifically because the slaves who freed themselves were not loyal to a team. As early black historian George Williams wrote in 1883, when people spoke of black patriotism in the American Revolution, Negroes were rated as chattel property by both armies and both governments during the entire war. This is the cold fact of history, and it is not pleasing to contemplate. The Negro occupied the anomalous position of an American slave and an American soldier. Lord. He was a soldier in the hour of danger, but a chattel in the time of
Lord.
Peace. And that
Talk about that dichotomy, Donna. I mean, just how jarring and how just...
In every war, right?
Yeah, every war.
In the Revolutionary War, it was true. In the Civil War, it was true. In the Spanish-American War, it was true. In World War I, in World War II. In fact, when people came back, soldiers who were fighting for this nation came back, they could be killed wearing the uniform that they used to fight for this nation. So even after slavery ended, this duality where you are inferior here, but here you're kind of our equal, at least we expect you to fight for us.
Yeah. I wanted you to park a little bit, too, and talk a little bit more about the Gullah Geechee culture and the Maroons who were able to sort of live free, and talk about that rich cultural tapestry that still exists to this day, right, especially in the Carolinas.
I believe Michael Harriot is Gullah Geechee, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you listen to the audiobook, you can hear him speak the language.
And it rolled off his tongue.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Oh, yeah, he sure did.
He sure did. And that's one of the reasons I recommend listening to the book, so you can hear him use the language. It's a proud culture. It's a culture of resistance. This language was created as a means of resistance so that people could not penetrate the culture and we could hold who we are as ourselves. I never understood the Gullah Geechee culture to be that. When I first became aware of it, I was in my 20s, and I went to South Carolina, and I went to what they call the market, And I saw these women sitting outside the market in the hot beating sun, and they were weaving these baskets and selling them, and they told me these are Gullah Geechee women, and I was so angry that they were sitting outside instead of inside of the market. And then I got inside the market and found out the reason it's called the market is because it's a slave market. It was an auction block that had been turned into a tourist attraction. So I was really angry, and coming from Detroit, I didn't know how to act. And so I started speaking out, and people, they were like, girl, stop it. We don't do that here. I was like, okay, let me calm my Detroit. No, but so my understanding of Gullah Geechee culture was one where people were oppressed. And the beautiful thing about this story is where he talks about people who were, to the visible eye, oppressed, but in their own worlds living very free. That yes, we speak a different language. Yes, we live in these islands. Yes, we do these things because we refuse to be conquered, right? So it made me proud of him, of his culture, and it helped explain his sense of, you know, when people grow up in certain places, I think Detroit is one of those places, you grow up with a sense of pride and a sense of I am. And you go other places like...
And that's affirmed everywhere you go.
Yeah.
I had black teachers affirm me my entire life, everywhere you go.
Everywhere you go. So, you know, you leave Detroit and you find out you're cocky. It's like, really? I just saw her listen. Donna, I didn't know that's cocky, because you see yourself as equal, right? Yeah. And I think that that's also perhaps true of the Gullah Geechee culture that he was describing. So I felt a lot of pride about that.
Yeah, you know, as a young person, our family used to take family-wide vacations. I mean, everybody in the family would go. And I remember being in high school and visiting Hilton Head Island for the first time. But also being completely ignorant of the holy ground with which we were riding on, right? And we would ride through the island, and we would see, you know, these massive plantations. They were still named plantations. We would see the Johnson plantation or the Berry plantation, and I remember being just sort of like, oh my God, why do we still have these plantations down here? Like, what's going on? And as I began to matriculate and get older and learn about Gullah Geechee and this culture and learn about Hilton Head, like those places exist as a memorandum, you know, just for us to. And it's both, right?
I get they do, and I'm not trying to be negative. I just can't imagine going to Germany and having a tourist attraction at Auschwitz. It is so offensive to me that these are tourist attractions. They're not museums. Yeah. They're not there solemn places. People get married there. People reenact the Civil War there. They do all kinds of things there, and it bothers me. Yeah, it really does.
But you know, I think that's the tension we carry as a country. In that, like, number one, how do we truly provide recompense and acknowledgement, because we haven't really acknowledged the horrible and brutal history that we have here in America. But how do we make sure that we also have spaces to learn it? And remember it without it being disrespectful. I know that, like, people probably don't think this way, but I do. I would like to know where the auction blocks were. Wow. I know there are folks who are doing the work to uncover former slave auction blocks. Like, I want to know where those were.
If you want to know where they were, in Charleston, South Carolina, one of the largest auction blocks in America, it's now a market. It's you go there and you shop. Yeah, and you can I know buy in Montgomery they have slave memorabilia there. You can literally buy slave memorabilia there.
What you mean by that?
What I mean by that is, I wouldn't buy any of that.
No, but I'm saying what's for sale.
Okay, so you know all of those Jim Crow features, Jim Crow, the person with the watermelon lips and the black face, all of that kind of stuff, minstrel kind of characterizations they have. That's
not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff.
What I'm saying is, this is what they did with the one of the largest auction blocks in America. It's a festival. If you go down in Charleston and you go to an antique store, you can buy a framed bill of lading for people. 2 pickaninnies, $1. Oh my God, I was crazy. So I'm like, and I'm young. I don't know how to act.
I want to clarify that is not the kind of memory that I'm trying to invoke. Okay,
I understand that.
Okay,
I'm just talking about in Charleston. I'm not saying there's a plantation I went to in there's a forced labor camp I went to in Louisiana.
You went to
And
the Whitney Plantation.
The Whitney Plantation,
Yeah.
and you had people there who educated you
Absolutely.
about the horrors, and it was not romanticized,
Yep.
right?
That's what I'm talking
In
about.
some of these places, it's romanticized. I'm not saying end the teaching of our history. I'm saying treat it with reverence as to the harm
That
that
part.
was there. That's all I'm saying. You have
Yeah.
bookstores where you have enlightenment, but in Charleston, South Carolina, you have bills of lading. So I'm 23, something like that, don't know any better. I've never been down south. My people have been in Detroit since 1919. I don't know how to act.
you
And so I'm
arrogant.
I'm
you
in
cocky.
this store, and I said, "Excuse me, sir?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Who buys this?" And he said, "I don't know what. Who buys this?" And he said, "Oh, lots of people like to buy this. You know, it's just really black people like to." And I said, why would anybody want this?" And this man had to drag me out the store. I'm not, because it was.
You got kicked out the store? They were supposed to.
A friend who was giving me a tour of Charleston dragged me out the store because he thought I was out of control, and I'm bad, okay? I'm outspoken now, but imagine 23-year-old me seeing a bill of lading. It was really, really upsetting. But the thing that made me feel good in reading this was understanding that the people who live here do not take this lying down,
That's
that they
right.
are not victims, that they have found a way to build culture and
resist.
build resistance in ways that are invisible to tourists, like I was then, and white people, right? Because when you're a tourist, you're acting like a white person in that space, right? And so it was educational.
Mm-hmm.
It was meaningful to read this from him, and I felt so much better about my visit and about those people who held their culture tight.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about drapetomaniacs, right? For me, I'll read it and then I'll comment on it. The quote that you have here, Donna, says, "The cause in most of the cases that induces the Negro to run away from service is as much a disease of the mind as any other species of mental alienation, and much more curable as a general rule. With the advantages of proper medical advice strictly followed, this troublesome practice that many Negroes have of running away can be almost entirely prevented, although the slaves be located on the borders of a free state within a stone's throw of the abolitionists." Now, for me, with this setup, so drapetomania is a fake disease assigned on runaway enslaved people by a doctor. His name was Dr. Sam Cartwright. What this also animated for me is the beginning of enduring and generational mistrust in America's medical system.
Right. There's a book here, and I don't remember the name, but when we came here the first time, there's a book here that talks about the racist history of psychiatry and mental health, and the fact that what's considered good mental health is rooted in oppression, and also what your caste is. Same thing with women, right? A woman who wants to live free has a mental condition, and we ascribe, whenever you have people you want to control and dominate, their quest for freedom becomes a disease, because in your mind you have allowed yourself to believe these racialized lies about who these people are. How else could you defend doing this? If you had to acknowledge that these were human beings too, then you would have to see yourself as a monster. When those people fight back, they're considered monsters and you're considered healthy.
I mean, the human inclination to want to be free from oppression and forced labor is legitimately categorized as a disease, right? The proclivity of running away from brutality is categorized as a disease. It was infuriating, and he did his best to inject levity. But I'm reading this, and I'm just like, this goes back. Our mistrust and culturally incompetent medical systems and psychological systems goes back to the founding of this country. It is insane how this has endured.
So when I was a young woman, I was in an abusive marriage, okay? And I went to see a therapist, and the therapist gave me some tests. And the test basically said that I didn't like women or men. And the way that it described me was so dehumanizing. I felt so broken just having this white man explain to me that I was this, deformed human being. And I went home, and my mother was a social worker, and I told her about this, and she said, girl, those tests mean nothing. Put that down. Those tests really are meant to see how well you're conforming to whatever the norm is. So my mother rescued me, even though it kind of stayed in my head for years, that there must be something wrong with me. And you're married to somebody who's telling you that something's wrong with you. The systems exist to keep people oppressed. And so drapetomania, like so many other diseases, hysteria, right? Hysterectomy. Remember, there was a time when people said that women did not really feel pain during childbirth, that was all in their heads. There's so many things and ways that particularly white men have justified or ignoring people's pain, ignoring people's plight, or contributing to it. There's still people right now who believe black people don't feel pain like white people do. Our skin is thicker, so we don't need to give them these drugs because they don't have pain. I raised student athletes. My children were athletes in high school, and they sometimes had sports injuries. And we went to the doctor, and they gave them the Rice method: rest, ice, compression, and elevation, right? They were giving other kids opioids. I'm so glad they didn't think my kids could feel pain, because a lot of those kids they were giving opioids became addicted. And this is one time racism saved us, is when they didn't flood our community with opioids and our children with opioids. So drapetomania, to me, as you said, it exists within this context of people rationalizing their behavior. Now, I don't want to bring it too far forward, but right now, there are people in the world who are oppressed. Let's look at South Africa and those people who are living in homelands, who were completely mistreated. But when they fight back, they're called terrorists. Fighting back is criminal. It was criminal when people who were enslaved fought back, and he talks about that. And it's hard in the human history to imagine any people have a natural desire for freedom. And drapetomania is ridiculous because of that natural desire for freedom. It's in this chapter, though, that he talks about the Great Dismal Swarm. Yeah. And that's when it gets me excited. I love it. A 1 million-acre area that covers southeastern Virginia and northeastern North Carolina. Historians still don't know how many escaped Africans built communities and lived free in the Great Dismal Swarm. I went to Jamaica and learned about the Maroons. They were living free in the mountains. I had no idea the Great Dismal Swarm had people living free in the United States through that. And so a lot of times they were aided by people who were enslaved feeding them. He gave a story about a woman whose name is Harriot, whose children were enslaved. And she saw her children. She took care of her children in the middle of the night.
In the middle of the night. And on top of them, like in an attic or something.
Yes,
Where was it?
She lived in an attic. She lived in the swamps. But she did not
And they never saw her for a long time. But she was watching them. What chapter was this? Was this 5?
This is chapter 5 when
gosh.
he talks about that story. Was just
it blew my mind.
Again, because you have young people. If I was alive then, they'd know it. Okay. First of all, people were fighting, and it's the thing I learned about in the Whitney Plantation was the extent to which people tried to become free all during the time they were enslaved, and all of these. And I keep calling it a plantation when I want to call it a forced labor camp. No, this is going to be changing language. I have to reteach myself. In the Whitney forced labor camp, they did describe this. That was really exciting to me. I think that it's important for us to understand the soldiers, the people who were proud in our past and who did not accept second-class status easily. Okay. So then the next one, and I know this is one of your favorite chapter. In chapter 7, the Negro spiritual. Yeah. And that's when they talk about the black church. The significance, and I think it's important for us to understand that, of Islam among people who were enslaved. Islam was practiced by at least a third of people who were brought here. And they were forced to convert. But he talks about the fact that people came here, and I know that people say, and a lot of people say, well, you have that slave religion. If you're Christian, you're accused of having a slave religion. He says, just as the white version of Christianity was used to justify the divinity of European royalty, colonization, and ultimately the theft and bondage of human beings, the black form of Christianity reinforced the universal concepts already ingrained in the culture of the new African America. Christianity did not replace the religion of Africans. It morphed into a new Afrocentric expression of the Christian faith that would at once be revolutionary, resistant, and laced with remnants of devotion imported from the motherland. In other words, our religious practice, the way that we are in church, our beliefs, the stories in the Bible that we emphasize, right?
We did that.
That's us.
That's us.
And it's a different Christianity than that fire and brimstone stuff that tells us we should be happy to be slaves, that drapetomania justifying stuff. And so I think it's important to understand how our people help to shape belief systems.
Yeah, and it was the other thing that was absolutely hilarious in this chapter. A couple of things. Number one, I think in this chapter he inserted a recipe for fried chicken. And with a tremendous amount of emphasis on Lowry seasoning sauce, he was like, you know, the one that you've had in your cupboard for 20 years, the big one, and you got to use old grease, and it's not cooking oil, it's grease. I just love the insertion of levity, but also he talked a little bit about, you know, the practices that are unique to, you know, black, theocratic Christianity, and one of those things was this thing that was passed down from his grandmother. He wanted to be a rapper, and his voice, he had lost his voice. He was getting sick, and his grandmother ended up saying to him, she said, "Let me tell you what to do to get rid of that." Right? She said, "Take a cup, pee in the cup, go ahead, drink it and turn it over, and then I'll pray over it." So she put a cup, she put a cup at the table, right? And he walked around this cup all day because he really wanted to enter this talent contest because it was a cash prize. But he also didn't want to be labeled as pee-pee boy from his sisters. So late at night, he whizzed in the cup, he drank it, and turned it over. And Grandma, he said, Grandma prayed. She said she called God every name that she ever known him to be. And he got better. He went on. He not only went on and entered the talent show, but he won all the cash from the talent show. So in his break, yo, this works. This is crazy. Fast forward. They're in, I forget the city that they're in, but it's where his family is from. And they're there for a week-long revival. And he's staying with Grandma and the pastor and the first lady. Grandma's sick. Grandma is not feeling well, right? And so what he sees Grandma do is take that cup, right? She took the cup, peed in the cup. She rinsed with the urine and spit it out, turned the cup over, and the pastor and the first lady and the grandmother prayed over it. And she got better and went on to revival. He talks about being there traumatized because I didn't know I was supposed to spit it out. And so, I mean, this is just so like uniquely us and hilarious. And, you know, the things that you see that sort of just animate and go back in your mind and just is like, oh my God, Grandma, I'm traumatized. And then he says to Grandma, he's like, I didn't know you were supposed to spit it out. She was like, you need Jesus. We going to the church right now. But he talks about, you know, the black church. And so one of my favorite pieces of the chapter is the end. So can we take this quiz real quick, Donna? Real quick. We got time to take this quiz?
We got to take the quiz now.
All right. So give yourself 1 point for each of the following that you have experienced. Use the answer key to determine the blackness of your church. Number 1, been baptized outside. Number 2, bought an outfit for a specific church service. Number 3, knew every seat on the front row was reserved for, that's right. Number 4, shouted. Number 5, played an instrument in your church band. Number 6, owned a tambourine. Number 7, turned to your neighbor. Number 8, this is gravy. Yelled at someone to demand that you better sing, preach, or praise his name. I see Barb Marty. Number 9, turned an R&B rap song into a gospel song. That was me all day, okay? Number 10, been anointed with extra virgin olive oil. Number 11, use a church fan from a funeral home, but you were not at a funeral. Come on. If you came up in Detroit, we're talking about Swanson's and we're talking about Cantrell, right? And Coles, Jay, and the Fall Brothers. Number 12, march into the sanctuary with a choir. Been disciplined for laughing, talking, or not having your eyes closed during prayer. Served on a board, whether it was the ushers, the deacons, the mothers, amen. Used a tithe envelope. That's right. On the choir robe. Yes, that's me. What was it? Put a shawl over someone who fainted while shouting. It's like 39, right? And so this is how he rates it. If you only got 0 to 10 of these, you are not a black church. If you got about 11 to 12 of these, you are a black church, but you kind of bougie with it, right? If you got 21 to 30 of these, you are solidly a black church. But if you got 31 to 39 of these, you are a black ass F church. I loved it.
I love the quizzes. Those quizzes.
Oh my gosh!
When he talked about seasoning food too, he talked about how people say how much
Southern food and soul food.
How much salt do you need?
A
he
dash.
said if you have to ask how much it is, that's not soul food. With soul food, you don't have to ask. And so I'm writing, and so I'm be straight. I measure, right? So Kevin looked at me. He was like, mm-hmm.
He went after those of you who measure.
He did.
He said it's not soul.
And so we were talking to somebody, and somebody said, which is the better cook, you or Kevin? He said, well, Donna's, she has her measuring spoons and her. I was so mad at him. He didn't speak the whole day. I was like, how dare you call me out like that? No, it was kind of funny because he was talking about the soul food stuff.
Yeah.
And, some people just have that natural flair and you learn it. So I have not used. One time our food was so salty because I was like, I'm never using another. No, you asked for it. Anyway, it's fun. Yeah. It's fun and it helps you get in context with that. So
and it's not this place that keeps black people oppressed. I like how he dismantled that, right? The black church is a sanctuary. It's a place, and he talked about it not being a place, but the people. It was a beautifully written chapter. It was
absolutely beautifully written. The next one is the Black Emancipation Proclamation.
I love this.
And all I'm going to say is it's a poem, but then he goes into detail about the fact that black people were not freed by white people. Mm-hmm. That black people made the difference between victory and failure in the Union Army. Yes. Mm-hmm. That black people freed themselves. He said the Union Army never intended to free the slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation couldn't free the slaves. Black people freed themselves, and so in so doing, they defeated the Confederacy and freed America from its most undemocratic institution. They were less concerned with flags, taxation, or saving the Union than they were with saving their people. Still, the result of their actions was a victory for America. The freed slaves would literally come to define what it means to be an American. We are the ones who continually push this country towards its goal of becoming more perfect. We are the reason it is still a union. Mm. If you look at anything, and he's going to go on into future chapters, and I want to make sure we leave time for everybody else, but in future chapters, he's going to talk about the role of black women, especially.
Let's not just roll that over that.
No.
Yeah.
No, we're going to talk about the role of black women. So I just wanted to, bring that up because I think it's important for us. So many times we get written out of history books. I think we know about 2 black women, Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. Sometimes Rosa Parks, Shirley Chisholm. But the number of women he talks about and the role these women played in the freedom of black people. And, Paula Giddings wrote this book, When and Where I Enter. I read this book when I was a young woman. She talked about the fact that black women have been involved in helping to free women, liberate women, emancipate women, and black people. And yet we never get the credit for it. There's never been a movement that we have not started.
Yeah.
So it's just very exciting to me. He talks about Ida B. Wells as the person.
The personification of
all
I
of
don't
that.
give a F.
I don't give an F.
It.
That's right.
What he said.
He said, and you can see it now. I'm not trying to be funny, but if you go down to Detroit City Council, you want to see the freedom fighters, the people who are fighting hardest for the people in the community. It's going to be the women sitting around the table. Always has been, always will be. You show me a person. There's a couple examples of men, so I'm not trying to shortchange any of the men who also did it. But when you look at Irma Henderson, Marion Mahaffey, Joanne Watson, and you look at their style of leadership, that has been part of our history that is not always talked about. So, he said, Ida B. Wells called for peace and armed self-defense. She was Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. and Oprah and Beyonce. Using a combination of statistical data, investigative techniques, and fearless truth-telling, she revolutionized journalism. And during her time, she was arguably the most famous black woman in America, period. Now, she had a real issue with Booker T. Washington, and so he goes
and
into it,
W.E.B. Du Bois.
W.E.B. Du Bois. She had issues with both of them for different reasons, because she felt like both of them were really abandoning some aspect of the fight and were consenting to some of these stereotypes. Washington, by leaning into them,
centering patriarchy in movement work,
right.
thus leaving her out. Yeah,
and centering that. But if you look at Du Bois, especially early Du Bois, he was centering the black exceptionalism.
Yes, the talented
and Booker T. Washington was centering, black manual labor, this idea that we need to stay in our place and get good at our place and then we can move up. Neither of them were fighting for the people in ways that were meaningful. And, at the time that she was very involved, we had so many things. He talks about Whites Gone Wild, which is that post-Reconstruction period where you had, even in Reconstruction, you had so many murders of black people following, the end of slavery.
Can I read my favorite passage from that about the Reconstruction? He says, "The founders only said all men are created equal. We, the ones who made this country, prove it. Still, that is also not the lesson of Reconstruction. The lesson of Reconstruction is us. That we exist and breathe and love and sing and laugh and are still here is not a miracle or a revelation. It is a simple, unignorable fact that we cannot be extinguished. All the evil that the world has ever had to offer has been lobbed in our direction. They enslaved, they brainwashed, they lynched us separately and massacred us by the hundreds. They enslaved us by the boatload and sold our families in pieces. They mined our muscles and our minds for their profit and built an empire from it. And when we did the same without their help, they set it on fire. This is America, a floor slick with blood, but that is not who we are." He sort of does this thing at the end of each chapter where he just gives us the punch. Right? Absent the levity now, at the end of each chapter, he gives it to us, and he gives it to us in a real way. I just had to read that while you were on Reconstruction.
No, I think it's important to understand. One of my pet peeves for Juneteenth is that's when enslaved people found out they were free. It really makes me angry because finding out that you're free and being free are two separate things. You're free, walk away. Your person who is over this forced labor camp is not letting you walk away. In fact, that's when the Union armies had to come and let the people who were over these forced labor camps understand that the people who lived there were free, so they could become free. Freedom was not something that was granted easily. And so I think it's important for us to understand the extent of violence that was used.
Yeah.
If you look at every period where black people have made progress in America, it has always been met with violence. If you look at
regressive
policies, if you look at, so the Civil War was supposed to be freedom. There was violence right away. It wasn't violence after post-Reconstruction, after the Union armies left. There was a Civil Rights Act that was passed that was never enforced because the president or nobody told the attorney generals that they're supposed to be enforcing the Civil Rights Act. There was more protection during the Reconstruction period. And because black people were so numerous in so many places, they quickly ascended to leadership roles. Whether it was opening schools, governorships, political, elected positions. We had more black politicians then than we have now, right? And universities, hospitals, so many things happened in that period of time. As he pointed out early on, These are people who knew what they needed to do in many instances. They just didn't have the means to do it. So I think it's important for us to understand that. And then in the, this kind of intersects with Detroit's history. After World War II, and during World War II, you had this mass migration as people were escaping racial terror in the South coming north. 1990, I think it's 1918 or 19, I'm not sure what it is. I think it's 19, maybe, it was one of the two. They call it Bloody Summer. 19, Bloody Summer. Bloody Summer was all over the United States, people being killed, all over the United States fighting for their rights. And in 1917 or 18, in East St. Louis, you had, this kind of thing. My grandmother's people were from East St. Louis. They killed everybody in sight. They don't know how many people were killed, at least 2,000. And a lot of times, they cut those numbers short. So you had, oh my goodness, what happened where they dropped the bombs, Black Wall Street.
Tulsa.
So Tulsa. You have what happened in Tulsa, and we know about Tulsa. We don't know about Rosewood. We don't know about East St. Louis. It was happening all over America where you saw that kind of freedom. And as Detroit became blacker and blacker, and black people started gaining power and freedom in Detroit in the 1960s, you had police repression getting worse in the 1960s than ever before. And they said, well, that's because of more violence. But in fact, Detroit had more homicides in 1930 and 40 and 50 than it did in the 1960s. The problem was not violence, the problem was blackness. And it was the police trying to curtail black power in a city that that turned into, a rebellion, a bloody rebellion in our city. And now you have a situation where you had a black president, and then following that you have January 6th. Following that you have the Tea Party, and you have people believing all of these things. So there's always this resistance to black achievement and black power.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for us to understand that these kind of highs and lows have just gone on throughout our history.
Yeah. We're going to take one more break, and then we're going to come back and talk about this file that Speedy had on stalwarts within the civil rights movement and get your comments and questions. We'll be right back. Keep it locked.
Have you always dreamed of being on the airwaves? Well, the Detroit Eastside Engaged Podcast Network, or DEEP for short, is here to make that dream a reality. Located inside the Stoudemire, the DEEP Network offers studio space and production staff to help get your podcast idea off the ground. Doesn't take a whole lot of work to get started. Just visit the Authentically Detroit page at ecn-detroit.org or call Sarah at 313-948-0344.
Founded in 2021, the Stoudemire is a membership-based community recreation and wellness center centrally located on the east side of Detroit. Membership in the Stoudemire is available on a sliding scale for up to $20 per year or 20 hours of volunteer time. The Stoudemire offers art, dance, and fitness classes, community meetings and events, resource fairs, pop-up events, the neighborhood tech hub, and more. Members who are residents of the east side have access to exclusive services in the wellness network. Join today and live well, play well, be well. Visit ecndetroit.org.
Welcome back to Authentically Detroit, everybody. Donna, you were saying what?
I think this book should be a class. There's so much contained in each chapter. There's so much scholarship, so many new ideas. And I think learning it collectively as a cohort, we could really take some time and really piece out the meanings of it. I'm so hard to do justice to this book.
Oh, my God.
There's so many nuances in there.
Within
and you're
the
right.
time
I
frame
listened
we
to Audible, and I was like, I'm ready for this. And then I opened up this book, and I was like, no, I'm not. It's just a lot. But Orlando, you wanted to talk about Speedy, and then I really want to engage with other people.
So Michael Harriot named J. Edgar Hoover Speedy. And, the time, the traditional time that's typically allotted for the civil rights era between the death of Emmett Till up until around 1965, then followed by the Black Power movement, and how cerebral and illegal J. Edgar Hoover, who was the assistant director, then ascended into the directorship of the FBI, moved toward taking out leaders of black justice advancement movements, right? And so he really went deep into the counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO. Y'all heard of it, right? And within this program, he had files on everybody you can think of. And some of these files had notes around their movement and plans on literally how to annihilate them. Let me tell you, Martin Luther King, after the I Have a Dream speech, scared him to death, right? But the rise of Bobby Seale and Huey Newton and the Black Panther Party, and that spread around the nation, especially when black men was taking up arms. California changed that law real quick. Actually, you can't carry guns in public when they marched on the California Capitol. But it also detailed plans for legit murdering these folks, right? We could talk about Fred Hampton in Chicago. We could talk about the many attempts at Malcolm X's life and how the FBI and local police forces provided absolutely no protection, even though they knew he was being haunted. It's the same thing with Bobby Seale. It is systemic. And when I was reading this, Donna, you know what I thought about? I thought about my time in D.C. every single time I went to D.C., including trips with Mr. Stokes. Is that if you walk past the FBI building, who's that building named after? It's still named after. Yes. Now, that's the kind of memory I ain't trying to have. That's the kind of commemoration that needs to go.
He should be mentioned in a Black History book anyway.
Mm-hmm.
J. Edgar Hoover.
He was supposed to be. He was black.
He was a black man. He was passing, but he was clearly from a black community, and betraying his own people. And everybody, it was an open secret that from people who grew up with him that's where he was from. But he was absolutely horrible in our history. And one of the people he got at was oh my goodness, what is?
Describe him.
Marcus Garvey.
Garvey. Oh yeah.
Garvey
too.
Was an early victim. He was deported with almost no evidence.
As soon as he was released from prison.
As soon as he was released, he's deported. They had to lock us up, and they're still doing it, And right now, I think it's different, but I think it's important for us to stand in this moment where free speech is still being punished in the United States of America. People are losing their jobs because they are opposing genocide. People are losing their jobs because they have an opinion. Even if you have an opinion and disagreement, why are people unable to speak truth to power in this country even now? So I think that, there's that fear, but I think that it's not like it's gone away. It's still here to me, especially at this time right now where people are being censored. My grandmother had an FBI file my entire life.
This was the most fascinating story I ever heard you tell, and I only heard it because we were on another podcast. We got our own podcast. She ain't never told this story on our podcast. She buried the lead in another podcast.
I'm sorry.
Talk about your grandmother real quickly.
Oh, my grandmother was, she was a social activist, and she married my grandfather. My grandfather was abusive to her, but she was very, very active politically, and she belonged to an organization, I think it's called A Development of Our Own, that was started by somebody from the Black Dragon Society in the 1930s. They were infiltrating cities all over the United States. In the early part of the 20th century, black people felt this kinship with Japanese people because they were the ones who were really, challenging European rule. And so I think his name is Takahashi. General Takahashi and my grandmother became very friendly. And so that she was involved in that. So he ended up getting deported. But his development of our own and his work with the Black Dragon Society contributed to the formation of a Nation of Islam in the city of Detroit. And so she's
Temple number one, baby.
Temple number one. So one of my cousins read this book and she was like, oh! And so we all read it. We didn't know this growing up about my grandmother, but we knew that she was a communist. The Communist Party was very, very active in the city of Detroit, fighting for black rights, fighting against so many things in ways that a lot of these civil rights organizations would not do. And so my grandmother, Coleman Young, many other black people affiliated with the Communist Party, even if they themselves were not communist. But growing up, when she moved in with my mother when I was in college, she and my mother lived together. Her mail came to her house. It was always pre-opened by the FBI. We always heard clicks on the phone when she picked up the phone. We're talking about a woman who at that time was in her 70s, who was still being monitored by the FBI. So, everybody knows about McCarthyism, right? And the Red Scare where people lost their jobs. Now, one of the interesting things is right before that McCarthyism period, you also had a period where you had so many, I think there's some 30-some, Rachel Maddow has a podcast on it. She actually wrote a book about it. There were 30-some congressmen in the United States who were actual Nazis, going to Germany and collaborating with Hitler. Henry Ford was collaborating with Hitler. No file on them, but a file on, communists. So anyway, I think that the way that black people and black power and leadership and freedom has been contained by our government is well documented in this book. But I think also this idea of moral superiority is really, we're not talking about morally superior people. We're not talking about intellectually superior people. We're not talking about people who had a greater understanding of so many trades. They were not greater engineers. They were not better at their crafts. They were not better at home building or any of those things. What they had guns, and they were more powerful, and they were able to use that power to oppress a whole group of people. And it's not just in the United States. If you look at what was happening in Africa in 1886, I want to say that's at the Scramble for Africa, where Europe just went and they all redrew borders and decided this is part of Africa I have. If you look at the genocide that went on, 10 million people in the Congo alone. And we're still in the Congo.
Thank you, Belgium.
We're still in the Congo right now, getting minerals that are used for batteries. And people are still dying and still working with slave wages and still don't have freedom. So I think, when I read this book, it reminds me of our history. It helps me have pride. But for me personally, it helps me also understand our place in the world, and that this is a world and that we have to still fight for people who are not us. Because most of us, who are in this room at least, are living relatively better lives than our ancestors during the time that he is outlining. Although some of us are living in forced labor camps still, in prisons in America.
Yeah.
Way too many of us.
And he pointed out that the 13th Amendment still calls that slavery. It's slavery. Yep.
And they're producing food that goes to every grocery store. So I'm not trying to be.
And these we're going to do a whole other show on that. But
but I think it's important to understand this is history, and people had to fight during those times, and they did. They fought during those times so that we could have the lives that we have right now. But the fight has to go on because there's so many people who don't participate in our level of freedom, our level of, having rights in America, because you still have all of those different, roles for American people. At any rate, I want to hear from you guys. Who read the book? Raise your hand if you read the book.
I read the book.
Raise your hand if you listened to the book. Raise your hand if you're going to read the book.
If you kind of skimmed through it and, did that thing. Okay. Just some initial thoughts and reactions to the book, and even to the discussion. What's coming up? What's coming up for you, Barb?
Well, I haven't gotten that far into the book, and I was struck by some of his. Well, they sounded anecdotal because of his style and his delivery, but the cannibalism, the fact of who was actually coming over here and who England or Spain sent here. They had no skills. They didn't know anything about farming. It's a miracle that we made a country at all. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of thing. And when I thought about it, I thought, well, why would you tell that part? You wouldn't tell that part. So I guess you can't blame them for not being that brutally honest.
Right.
But they won't let you learn it either, right?
No, they won't.
So this book, I'm sure, is going to be banned from libraries. Teachers are going to be banned from teaching it.
Yeah,
The
it's already
idea
on the
that,
vending list. Mhm.
what's the First Amendment? And yet we're violating the very First Amendment that, which is freedom of speech,
Yep.
freedom of press. DEI, if teachers are teaching this, they're being oppressed. It's crazy the way that people are trying to suppress it. No, you would not teach your history. If you are an oppressor, the last thing you want to do is teach the oppressed about what you did to them or let them learn. But I think we have a responsibility as people who belong to that class to learn it anyway, and then to teach other people so that we can act in a way that's humane. And when I look at oppression, it's not just white, black, because again, it's human beings, And I teach a class, right? And you look at what's happening in Appalachia, and you can't say Appalachians are doing really well. You can't say Appalachians are not treated like a separate class of people. They're white, but they're rednecks, and rednecks are quite human. Now, my own grandpa, we have all of these stereotypes. And then if you look at Navajo Nation, and you look at what's happening to Native Americans in Navajo Nation, people who are engaging in uranium mining and whose communities are being destroyed, same thing. So I think human rights, he speaks to this, and he speaks to, I think, the inhumanity of some people against other people.
I wonder, I know it's not unique to America to sort of forget without reckoning, right? I remember walking the streets of Germany, and everywhere you go, you are reminded of the brutality that the country engaged in under the leadership of Hitler, Stalin, Lenin, name any leader, right? It's literally engraved in cobblestone, like on the streets, right? It feels like no monuments to them either, and it feels like they are trying to really do a job of recompense. But then, like, I walk through Brussels in Belgium, and there's a statue of Leopold. And I am completely enraged and just jarred by this. And I feel like the United States is a lot like Belgium in terms of our inability, and he sort of lays this out in the beginning, to tell the freaking truth.
Well,
to tell the truth and to reckon with the brutality, with the theft, right, with the traffic, all of the asinine things that he describes.
if you tell those truths, then you have to change.
That's right.
So it's better to suppress those truths. But for those of us who want change, those of us who want people to be treated equally in this country, those of us who want to fight injustice, the truth is power. And I think that telling the truth is us empowering people who can't tell it themselves, speaking on behalf of people who don't have an audience, right? So as we talk about this, as we look at that, I think it's important for us to look at this in the context of Black history. And I think it's important for us to look at Black history in the context of world history. And I think it's important to look at world history in the context of the present day. It's easy also sometimes to look back at what used to happen because you don't have any responsibility for what happened in the past. Somebody's going to look at what's happening even in the city of Detroit right now and say to themselves, how did they take 1 out of 3 homes for tax foreclosure and overtax people by $600 million and nobody did anything? They might even ask themselves, how did they build stadiums downtown while people were living in the streets, and make sense of that? So I think, we're living history. And we are, we have those of us who have children or grandchildren, they're inheriting whatever it is that we do right now. So for me, when I read books like this, it makes me more committed to activism. Does anybody else feel that way when you read about the past and see how far we've come and the kinds of fights that people had to engage to get us here, that we need to do more? So any other thoughts about what we're talking about? Drapetomania, what do you think of that?
I saw Jay's hand go up. He read the book.
I did.
Yeah.
What I liked about this book, Michael Harriot's adding to, I think, the dialogue, the same with Hannah Jones, Kennedy, this kind of Black history renaissance where we're using the language that needs to be used. What they're all speaking into is, even locally, Dinah Williams, history professor here at Wayne State, is talking about, like emancipation didn't start at 1865. Black people were freeing themselves since 1619. right? I think, Donna, you mentioned earlier that civil rights didn't start with Emmett Till. You know, that there were laws on the books that people have been fighting for long before that. And so just really weaving this dialogue that Black history is much larger than what you've ever been taught in your schools.
Yeah.
Much larger, much more
larger.
expansive.
And you can't really teach it in a month, can you?
We relegated to the month. Any other feedback, reactions to, at least to the discussion if you haven't read the book? Because what I do know about book clubs, having been in a few, is that most people come having not read the book. So it's okay, we ain't mad. But just, a response to what we've shared and what other folks have shared so far. No? We're good?
All right.
Okay.
So if you'd like a copy of the book, they're selling it here at Next Chapter Bookstore. And I'd like to thank our gracious host, Jay and Sarah, for letting us
Can
come
we give
here.
them a clap?
It is so exciting to have an actual bookstore in our community so that we can come and get
And
books.
it's a beautiful bookstore.
It's a beautiful bookstore.
Come and visit it.
Lots of books here from different genres. So I hope that you walk around and look at that. And we're going to come again next time with another book. We're going to do this every month. And the books will, vary from, I think, nonfiction to fiction so that we can not always be looking at it from one perspective. If you have any suggestions of books, you can share them with us. We're always happy to learn.
Thanks for joining our book club, y'all.
Yes, thank you
Join
for
our book
coming.
club again.
And please get the book.
Yeah. Can I give
And-
folks the address to Next Chapter?
Absolutely.
It is 16555 East Warren Avenue in Detroit. Again, that's 16555 East Warren Avenue here in the city of Detroit. On the east side. Come get your books. So yeah, if you have any suggestions for us, please let us know. You can hit us up on our socials at Authentically Detroit on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or you can email us at authenticallydetroit@gmail.com. All right, it's time for shout outs. You want to shout anybody out?
Yes, I want to shout out Dr. Gloria House, who was at our event last night, who was quite a leader. I was really excited to meet her and have her show up at the Hush House exhibit. I'd like to shout out the ECN staff team. Keisha and Angela are here today. They were here yesterday, and they certainly support the community in ways I really appreciate, as well as Roshan Harris, who pulled together the event yesterday and connected us with Hush House.
Yeah, I want to go on record and shout out my middle school civics teacher, Mr. Hubert Stokes, man. I think it is one of the seeds that began to animate my love and passion for not just history, but for reading overall. And I think it is an amazing example of just generational learning and a rich cultural Black heritage here in the city of Detroit. I was able to learn from a man who also taught my mom, who is here tonight. It's kind of blowing my mind. And so shout out to Mr. Stokes.
Some people say, how many Black teachers have you ever had?
Yeah.
Black male teachers have you ever had?
Yeah.
And I can honestly say that until I was in college, 0.
Wow.
What a blessing to have one.
Yeah. And he ain't play.
In middle school. I bet.
He ain't play
I
either.
bet.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much for coming out and for listening. And we will see you next time.